Okay, folks, we should be recording now. We got about, looks like 2 minutes to go. And I'll be out of here too. So it's all yours, Stephanie. We've got about a minute or two.
Okay, sounds good. Do we need a backup timer? Or are we okay? You're good, Phyllis?
I can hear you.
Okay. All right, welcome everyone to our Superintendent of Public Instruction candidate debate. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Wahkiakum County Republican Party and the Wahkiakum County Democratic Party, working together for the good of our county and rural folks everywhere. This event is also live streaming on the Wahkiakum R&D YouTube channel. Welcome everybody and thank you for joining us. My name is Stephanie Lights. I'm the principal at Wahkiakum High School and I will be your moderator for tonight's debate. The Superintendent of Public Instruction is a nonpartisan elected office that is responsible for overseeing all aspects of the state's K-12 public system. Our panelists tonight are the two candidates you'll find on the ballot this November. Chris Reckdahl, incumbent. Chris is currently in his first term as superintendent, was a classroom teacher and fiscal analysis for the Washington State Senate. Maya Espinoza, she is the challenger. And Maya's small business owner and served on the OSPI Student Data Task Force. Here are the rules for tonight's forum. All of the questions were submitted ahead of time in response to our request in the Eagle and online. There will be no questions taken from the audience. I will ask a question when each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. With 15 seconds remaining, our timer will state 15 seconds. At the end of 2 minutes, our timer will state time's up. I may allow a candidate to quickly finish his or her thoughts. The first candidate to respond to a question will have an additional 30 seconds of rebuttal time. If a candidate has time remaining in the 2 minutes after answering the questions, he or she may continue speaking on another topic if you choose. I will rotate the order in which the candidates respond to each question. Any questions?
Not from us.
Okay, let's get started with our first question. There will be no 30-second rebuttal on this one. Please take 2 minutes and tell us about yourself and why you are running for this position. Chris, will you go ahead and start?
Sounds great. Thank you very much to both parties down there in Wahkiakum County, and Stephanie, thank you for moderating this tonight. I'm Chris Reckdahl, State Superintendent of Schools for the state of Washington, and it's nice to be with you tonight. I'm a born and raised kid here in the state of Washington. I grew up in a little town called Snohomish, east of Everett. My parents both had an 8th grade education and quite a bit of poverty and struggle. Many of you know that story because my oldest living brother, Vic, taught for many years and raised his family in Cathlamet. And so we've got a lot of strong ties to Wahkiakum County, and I taught at Mark Morris High School just down the highway there in Longview, and my wife and I lived in Ridgefield. So we've kind of been all over that region for many years. I got myself into public education because I believe so deeply in its opportunity and its democratization. It's where the sons and daughters of people with financial struggle like me and people of great means can come together and learn together. I ended up being a classroom teacher, first in my family to go straight to college. My brother Vic did it as an adult with kids, so even tougher road for him. And a school board member. I spent 14 years working for the community and technical college system, and worked as a legislator for a while, and lots of other roles here. This one's a unique one, and I'm really proud of what we've done to bring in transition kindergarten, getting kids early jumpstart in kindergarten. Really proud of what we've done to bring in dual language learning. We've torn down high stakes exams is the only way to graduate. Now we brought in career and technical education programs because not every kid wants to or needs to go to a university, but that option should be there for all of our students. More pathways to the military. I know we'll get into it in the Q&A, but I've been really, really blessed to have the role to make the progress that we've made over the last 4 years with record high graduation rates.
15 seconds.
And but we've got this COVID moment now that causes us to think very differently in the short term. But we don't want to lose momentum when we get through this on all the incredible work we've done together for the last 4 years. Thanks for having me tonight.
Time's up.
Thank you, Chris. Maya, will you please tell us about yourself?
Happy to, and thank you so much for hosting this event tonight, Wahkiakum County. Thank you for being engaged in this important discussion. You know, I was disappointed to see that only a third of the people voted in this race just 4 years ago compared to those that voted for the governor's office. So I'm so thankful to folks like you for hosting these debates and discussions about such an important role. My name is Maya Espinoza. I am running for this position of Superintendent of Public Instruction. First and foremost, I'm a mom with 2 kids in school. Now, when we say in school, we really mean these days online. They're online attending school. I wish they were in school, but you know what? We're keeping the kids safe right now, and I'm hopeful that we can find ways to get our kids back in the classroom, our teachers back in the classroom, safely and sensibly, of course. But you know, with kids in public schools, and of course being, you know, somewhat of a young parent myself and a younger teacher, I had been frustrated with our school system. It's a little bit rigid, I think. I think we have a lot of demands put on our teachers, a lot of demands put on our principals and schools. And quite honestly, the inequities that I see in our school system have been long lasting. These have, you know, we've been trying to remedy these for a long time now. And so when I decided to run for this position, we launched a platform called, you know, Reimagine Education. And the idea here really is to be open-minded about what our school system should look like and how it can be a little bit more adaptive and innovative to be able to fulfill the needs of working families and students for today and the
15 seconds.
future. Thank you. And so that's the platform of which I'm running. I, you know, didn't have any idea that COVID would be upon us and really disrupt the system for us. And so I think we have a historic opportunity to do something different.
Thank you, Maya.
Sure.
All right, your next question. If elected, what is one big goal that you would like to accomplish, and how will you make sure it gets implemented? Maya, will you start with that one?
Man, I've got a lot of things that come to mind with this one. One of the big goals that I would like to see is it has to do with actually our migrant student population. Washington State is home to the largest migrant student population in the country after California and Texas, if you can believe it. So we have access to quite a large amount of migrant Title II federal funds. And unfortunately, it's school districts that need them that aren't receiving them. When we received these funds, school districts are burdened with having to apply for these funds, and oftentimes they weren't receiving them, aren't eligible for the funds, and so they get turned back into the general fund or allocated elsewhere, general education fund, that is. I think that's unfortunate and needs to be addressed immediately. I have some ways to be able to fix that immediately. I've actually presented them to Chris Reichdahl and his administration. But this needs to be remedied right away. These kids are on the furthest end of the opportunity gap because they're particularly mobile, oftentimes English learning, and oftentimes switching schools quite frequently. Our federal government has recognized that these kids need a boost and has given our state this money. But as far as I can see, OSPI has failed these students in making sure that those schools that are entitled to these funds receive them. So that would be the first thing on my list that I think is a big deal that isn't one that gets much attention, and unfortunately has not been one that my opponent has been willing to fix. It's easy to make a process, impossible, but we need to make sure to focus on these
15 seconds.
entitled to these funds. And I think that the way that we fix that, and I've presented these ideas once again, is to go into those districts that are entitled to these funds, help them become eligible for them, and thereby making sure that they
Time's up.
get the funds.
Thanks, Maya. Chris, if elected, what's one big goal you would like to accomplish, and how will you make sure it gets implemented?
Yeah, thank you. We got to get every single kid graduated with a high quality diploma. That is fundamentally what we are tasked to do. We've got a reality in this country where if you do not have a high school diploma, you're in big trouble financially. It's very, very hard to create a sustainable life for your family and your community without some credentials. So not just a high school diploma, but something that looks like an industry recognized credential or degree. But let's be clear, only 30 or 35% of students need a baccalaureate degree, but virtually everyone needs something more than a high school diploma. So these middle skills, as they've been called in the past, they can be technical skills, but sometimes they're a little different. We've been really working to try to create that opportunity. We do it by flexing up our credits, by making sure we're not bound by high stakes federally mandated tests. We bring back current tech ed programs. It's now a pathway to graduation. We've got regional skills centers, and candidly, we need to get a skills center still in the Cowlitz County area because it's quite a trek to go south or north for a student to really participate. Even with a satellite option, it isn't quite as robust as it probably ought to be. But this is the fundamental difference between living a life of sustainability and not being dependent on public assistance, or unfortunately, a really difficult challenge. After 4 years, and then we measure 5-year progress and beyond, and with our community and technical college partners doing high school completion, we still have about 15% of our students within 5 years who don't get a high school diploma. Now, many of them pick it up later or an equal credential later, but a lot can happen in your life between, not getting it in high school and later on, including a lot of debt and a lot of challenges. So fundamentally, graduating all students. We know who they are, who are disproportionately impacted. They are students with disabilities, and we've added $1 billion of biennium to try to support those students and
15 seconds.
practices. It is migrant students, and we spend all of our Title II money and all of our Title I money for sure. It all gets out to districts. And we definitely know that students who are highly mobile and students with language access barriers also have
Time's
struggled.
up.
Okay, thank you. Our next question starts with a long intro. It's a fair assumption that the person who heads the next term of state superintendent will face an unprecedented task of educational reform. Unions want more money and support. State and federal budgets are strained and stressed and are likely to provide less funding. The McCleary fix is broken and running out of time. Remote learning is a new paradigm, yet there is inequitable access to internet and technology, the internet is a huge issue in Wahkiakum County. There are potentially significant legal battles on the horizon around sex education, vaccine requirements, and special education. Are you sure you want this job, and why? Chris, will you start? And then this is a question we'll start our 30-second rebuttal with.
This is, the paramount duty of our state. There is no power in our democracy without broad access to public education. It is the foundation that helped build the country. It's what sustained us through very difficult times. We're still recognized as a nation around the world that makes a commitment to kids at age 5 all the way through age 18. Many countries cut them off sooner than that. It's a powerful notion in this country. It is literally what made us who we are, along with some free market capital, which inspires innovation and creativity. So the key here is to really maintain a commitment to public ed. And that means you've got to invest in communities holistically, not just in their education system, but access to broadband and connectivity, building out that last mile of fiber. It means making sure that kids have access to mental health supports, chemical dependency supports. It means making sure that there's jobs in the community. And so part of the way I always see the work, given my background, is holistically. I'm not just the school superintendent. I have to be a partner in a bipartisan way with policymakers, local, state, and federal officials to think about holistic investments in a community. It's why in my first year, I took a very bold action, frustrating some legislators, no doubt, to make sure that when we harvest state timberlands, all of that revenue stays in our local communities in timber country. Because in the past, that money was remitted to the state general fund. That's accrued about $40 million in benefits so far to rural school districts. And that's the kind of risk taking and the kind of holistic economic approach that it takes to be successful, I think. So yeah, I want the job. We've done amazing things in this state, but there's a ways to go. We got to fix capital budgeting in the state, which impacts rural communities disproportionately. They generate a lot of money, but a lot of it goes to
15
suburban.
seconds.
We got to make sure that those dollars continue to stay in rural communities. And that's my background. That's what I love to do. And I'm going to keep doing that for rural Washington.
Thanks, Chris. Maya, do
Yeah,
you want this job?
I know it. Well, absolutely. Do I want this job? And, you know, I often joke about having skin in the game with my kids, but, you know, I just actually had a baby last week, and you wouldn't know that in virtual campaign world, but I am committed to this job and I will see it absolutely through. I am busting my butt, as is the rest of my campaign team, to be able to achieve this. Because really, we do have this historic moment to transform our education system. And, you know, frankly, I feel that my opponent is working to resurrect this, you know, 19th century school model with a few additions to kind of fit within the structure that we had before. And I'm really looking to do something different. And, you know, I've said that I don't necessarily have the blueprint for what that looks like because we don't know what's possible yet. And I'm not the smartest person in the room. I want to bring together the brilliant minds that we have in this state at our disposal. And I'm excited to be able to, you know, take on this massive job and responsibility for our kids. I think now is just the chance to do it. And so I'm very thankful to be in this place where we may actually get to do this once and for all. So again, I want to bring people together to be able to make this dream come true. It is going to take building support, building coalition. And I would say that my opponent has demonstrated that he's not willing to build coalitions of support, as demonstrated by this forcing of the sex ed bill, which 58% of the people he surveyed said no, they don't want it. Thousands showed up to the Capitol, you know, to protesting this bill. This is not the way that we build coalition around new ideas and changes to our education system. So I look forward to working together with people on all sides of any given issue, looking at different elements around the world that are already working. I'm thankful to have been invited on a global education forum where we did look at some of these models about what's working in tech ed, what's working in ed tech. And it was so bizarre to me. In Washington state, we're caught flat-footed without technology. I didn't hear if that was a time up or a 10 seconds or, so I'll just leave it there.
I think you're good. Thank you. Chris, would you like 30 seconds?
Yeah, I look forward to, undoubtedly a question later on referendum 90, so we can get the facts on the table. We are a state that's innovating, a transition kindergarten, bringing them in as 4-year-olds, giving them early supports. Making sure the junior senior year now is being deconstructed so that students can focus on pathways to industry credentials and military service, bringing bilingual education to 40 districts around the state. We are innovating. We're a top 15 state in performance now. We're going to continue to get stronger. So we already have a blueprint, which is awesome. And we are developing and executing that. I put 27 bills in the legislature, massively bipartisan. And so I look forward to continuing to innovate.
Thank you, Chris. There is a question about that coming. So the next question though, is how do you propose to attract new people to the teaching profession with its high burnout rate, stress overload, unfunded mandates, and inequitable pay? And in small rural districts, the extra requirements, all the hats we ask teachers to wear, the multi-endorsements that are needed, can be a big burden. So what is your plan to help encourage people to go into the teaching profession? And Maya, will you start?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the question. It's an important one. And I think it does go to an issue that we continue to have today, which is teacher retention and recruitment. One of the ways that we can certainly do this is by making the job attractive in ways that teachers are excited to come to work, not just for the pay. And certainly, you know, a pay boost was long overdue, but we want to see teachers be able to be freed up to do what they want to do, what they love doing, which is to teach and inspire students. I talk to so many teachers that feel burned out after a few years because of, some of the things that you were just talking about, which are wearing these multiple hats, all of the, unfunded mandates, the requirements of them as teachers beyond, what they want to focus on, which are those things that I already mentioned. So I want to make sure that we are providing additional support, be it through para-educators or a restructuring of teacher roles so that they can focus on those things. I think that we can also use technology right now, as we've already all been warmed up to be able to streamline the teacher's role so that grading is more streamlined, student progress can be better monitored, and their job can become a whole lot easier. Those are just some of the technical ways that we can support them. Of course, things like staff that are, taking away some of those extra burdens. But from the top, we need to, at an administrative level, reduce the burden on small school districts, on teachers, and on those demands. And I'm looking forward to being able to do that. I know it's, probably a lot easier said than done, but we hear these
15
complaints,
seconds.
and I'm trying to be much more adaptive to what teachers need. It breaks my heart when a good teacher feels burned out and bogged down by some of these requirements. So I look forward to alleviating those by bringing
Time's
people
up.
together and finding solutions.
Thanks, Maya. Chris, how do you propose to attract new people to the teaching profession?
Yeah, it's a multi-tiered strategy. And one of the smartest things the state did, again, in a very bipartisan way, was increase compensation for teachers. We saw for about 10 years in a row, our teacher prep colleges declining in numbers. Young people were saying, this is not something I want to do. We've kind of stabilized that now. We've got a new starting salary that's more competitive. Wallet Hub, if you check it out, wallethub.com just ranked us 2 weeks ago as the #1 state in the country to be an educator. They attribute that to starting salary, average salary, pension and benefits, access to training and professional development, and national board bonuses. So we are a state that's always going to have to keep innovating and solving problems. We compete against some incredible companies from Portland to Seattle to Vancouver, British Columbia. So our biggest competitor is not a teacher leaving our state to go to another one. It's getting a better opportunity in the state in which they live. So this compensation issue is a very big deal. But more than that, you got to mentor. As you know, as a principal, particularly in a rural community, we can attract somebody for their first job, but often they want to bounce to something else as they get some experience. So the recruitment and retention part of it's just as important, which means mentorship and support, ways for them to develop and grow, maybe flexing up their assignments, hopefully continuing to de-link these high-stakes standardized tests so that we're not teaching narrow content for purposes of a federal exam, but instead we're teaching for the purpose of creativity and learning. And when teachers get a chance to do that and innovate and create, I just think it's a much more enjoyable profession. I know I can speak from experience on that for sure. And then lastly, you want a community that's sustainable, right? We do lose a lot of young teachers in rural communities because they want to go to the place that's the bigger bright lights, the bigger cities. And so I said it in the beginning, I'll say it again. It's not enough to just be an education advocate.
15 seconds.
For rural communities, helping them in economic development, helping them access capital, helping them build infrastructure. The stronger the community, the more likely it is we'll retain the teacher.
Thanks, Chris. Maya, do you have a rebuttal?
No, I think we're, you know what? I will actually take just quick. I only have 30 seconds, so I better hop to it. One of the things that I did was champion a bilingual education bill, which incentivized bilingual kids to become teachers in their own communities. I was able to pass this on a unanimous level, so bipartisan, absolutely to the fullest. But this was a way to recruit teachers that were bilingual and have them work in their communities. And if they did that for 5 years, their student loans would be forgiven. And we liked to joke when talking about this bill that by that time they probably had a girlfriend or boyfriend and were settled in for a while after 5
Time's up.
Nice. All right. So next question. If the sex ed bill becomes law, which specific curriculum would you want your local school to implement and why? The committee was really wondering about specific curriculum. So Chris, will you start?
Great. Yeah, I'm glad we get the facts out here today. So your state legislature over 2 years ultimately passed Senate Bill 5395. It's on the ballot in the form of Referendum 90. Yes on 90 keeps it, no on 90 repeals it. They looked at 29 other states. We helped them do this. This is very important because of the underlying public health crisis. 1 in 6 boys and 1 in 3 girls who survey tell us that they've been victims of sexual abuse as children, sexual violence in their middle or high school years, sexual assaults, or unwanted sexual touch. Other states more conservative than us have figured this out. The experts tell us that it's a continuum of learning. The kindergarten through 3rd grade curriculum is what we call social emotional learning, a bill sponsored by Republican lawmakers 2 years ago. It's about safely understanding how to avoid bullying, how to recognize an adult that you trust in your life, how to control your emotions. By late elementary school, you're talking about puberty. Since more kids go through it, that's when bullying and teasing can really take off, particularly for young girls. By middle and high school, you're teaching avoidance behaviors, including abstinence, trying to avoid sexually transmitted infections, trying to avoid sexual assaults and violence. Ultimately, the legislature took 2 years because they listened to parents and said, number one, local control. There is no particular curriculum. OSPI, like any other subject, has some available that we review for grade level standards, but we don't require it, we don't mandate it, we don't even approve it, we review it. But school districts in this state adopt their math just like they will this, so they need to make that choice. We're talking about as few as 6 lesson plans, 1 in early grades, 1 in 4th and 5th grade, 2 lesson plans in middle school and 2 in high school. 6 lesson plans over 13 years is what we're talking about. Locally adopted,
15 seconds.
locally determined, publicly available, and parents get the right to opt out of any or all of it.
Thank you, Chris. Maya?
So the question was about which curriculum we would like our school districts to use. My school district uses, they comply with state law as written right now, which is HIV and STD prevention and Aaron's Law, which is essentially good touch, bad touch for younger students, which is important. There's a lot of curriculum that I'll say there's a number of curricula on OSPI's website, or it used to be there. It's a little bit hard to find now, that has been reviewed for different grade levels. I've looked at a number of these, and there are ones that, are more acceptable for me as a parent than others. The ones that are approved or would pass under this Senate Bill 5395, none of which I am very comfortable with. The 3, I believe there are just the 3, and I think it's 3 R's, Flash, and one other that the name escapes me. But these ones, they're at different levels and different age groups. It doesn't sit well with me as a parent. And so I'm thankful for the kind of reverse question here, which is what would be acceptable? What would you like to see? And quite honestly, as the bill is written itself, 5395 is written very smartly in that it is, supposed to be age appropriate, medically accurate. You can opt out. These are all great things that anyone would agree with. Moreover, a majority of parents are not opposed to sex ed, yet a majority seem to be opposed to this mandate of a specific type of sex ed. And that's exactly where I fall into. That's the category that I fall into. None of these 3 seem very good options to me. And I don't like being limited at the local level. We say that there is local control, that districts can pick which of these options would be allowed. But at the end of the day, this is another unfunded mandate if we're not happy with those 3.
Okay. And Chris, do you want 30 seconds?
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. First of all, I just really want to clarify for everyone watching tonight or might watch this later on and really apologize for the deceitful tactics that you've seen. The reason you think there's a prescribed curriculum is because one side of this conversation has said there is, but it's fundamentally untrue. The bill is explicit that local districts get to choose. Pick something from another state, create your own, pick one from a list. Local communities get to decide this. The other side grabbed images from a third-party book, an author whose materials are never shown to children. It's parent material. If a parent reaches out and says, I want to work with my kid on puberty or reproduction, do you have ideas that I can work with? Same as they ask us about math or social studies, there's a list of things that you want to look into these. They superimposed that on Facebook on an OSPI template and said, this is what we're going to teach your children. It is deceitful, it is dishonest, it is untrue.
Okay, thanks, Chris. It's definitely been a big issue. All right.
Matters.
So our next question is small rural school districts have significant disadvantages in terms of funding, class offerings, diversity, and access to key infrastructures such as the internet. How do you envision creating a better balance and sense of equity between the few large urban districts and the many small rural districts? So that'll be your turn to start, Maya.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, this is why, more than 5 years ago, I wrote an op-ed asking the legislature to prioritize connectivity for rural parts of our state. It's patently unfair that we don't have the infrastructure built out for rural communities. It's internet is a public utility, or is becoming one, much like running water and electricity. And, I talked about this years ago. This is exactly the type of issue that I think we can build bipartisan support on, especially if I'm elected. This is an issue that affects Eastern Washington, and who is largely represented by Republican legislators, and Western Washington values of internet and equity and access. These are the values that I think we can come together on. We can spend a lot of time talking about where we disagree and where we won't make progress, but connectivity is so important and crucial right now. You mentioned school class choices and things like that as it relates to small schools and small school districts. Well, internet and having online access to different classes will help and goes a long way. There are parts of the country where there's actually buses with internet connectivity, where students during their time to class are, taking or studying up or doing other things online. And this serves particularly well in communities where there's a long distance on the bus. So those are some of the things that I would like to do right away. I'm thankful again that the pandemic has created this opportunity where we can do something transformative. And it's unfortunate to me that, in Washington State, where I think is the
15
capital of
seconds.
the country, we were caught flat-footed without being prepared to launch our kids online. And it's just a shame because we have the technology right here and we couldn't deploy it even after 6 months of kids away from
Time's
school.
up.
Thanks.
Thanks, Maya. Chris, what are your thoughts on the disadvantages for rural communities and how you will plan to support them?
Yeah, this is a national conversation finally, which is very good. Every state in the country has struggled to connect their rural communities long before COVID, and certainly this created an even bigger crisis. Our state has fortunately deployed over 300,000 devices to families, but just having a device isn't enough. And so we're getting close to a one-to-one connection in terms of the hardware for families, but in rural remote parts of the state, they may not have the broadband, and even the connectivity, the wireless opportunities takes an infrastructure, usually a base tower and a signal. So we've got companies ready to go. We need a national strategy on this. It's not just going to work in each state because it's probably a $2 to $3 billion contemplation in our state alone. So in the meantime, we're trying to deploy hotspots, we're deploying devices, we're creating that connectivity. Let me say very clearly, though, one of the best things we can do to advance this is to advance a prototypical school capital budget model, guaranteeing rural communities access to capital funds with or without a 60% bond vote. And even when they pass a local bond in rural communities, they don't have the property value or the scale to build the infrastructure that they need. If the state will make a commitment to rural communities in legislation I proposed each of the last 2 years, then you can guarantee that as we build or renovate facilities, then we can bring in that fiber where it's already there. We can bring it that last mile. We have huge opportunities to bring technology to rural Washington, but it also means building that capital infrastructure in those communities. And the way we fund school construction today is not going to work. I've tried to return every dollar of timber money. I've got a plan to return even more money from the capital budget to rural communities. We've proposed it. It's got bipartisan support, but we've got to build this coalition of rural legislators, and we've got them. We just got to get over the hurdle here in the next year.
15 seconds.
Thanks, Chris. Maya?
Yeah, so we have federal funds available to be able to support this infrastructure. We just haven't made it a priority. And again, I'm thankful for the opportunity to do that now. And I look forward to when the legislature convenes in January, being able to get funding for this. Education should be tied with technology throughout the duration of a student's career. And so I look forward to, once we make that connection happen, be able to maintain that internet connection throughout their time as a student, to help them then as a student and when they graduate to be able to find employment.
Thank you. All right, our next question. What do you believe is more important, to cover curriculum or to teach to mastery? Why? And how is your response related to mandated statewide testing? Chris?
I'm a big believer in mastery. Content's important. Kids need to be inspired and they need to have tangible things to work on. But when we try to cover too many chapters too fast and we cover them about that deep, we don't actually get critical thinking. We get short-term memory, short-term quiz attainment, and short-term test attainment. And then a year later, the kids say, I really don't kind of know what I learned in that subject. We all crammed for the test as kids. Remember that last minute? That's different than taking fewer examples, going deeper into them and asking critical thinking questions. And that's really the whole concept of what we're trying to do now around mastery. The state tests that we have are actually mandated by the federal government. That was bipartisan dysfunction in Washington, D.C. that had a chance to redo this, and they definitely made some progress. But they doubled down on testing by requiring it in 3rd through 8th grade, once in high school, in math and English language arts, and then 3 times over a student's career in science. That is mandated by the Fed. And so we have sought relief from that. I just applied to Secretary DeVos to get relief this year so we can get back into mastery, get back into what we call formative assessment, working with students throughout the year to understand what they know and not this high stakes test. Being the only Secretary of Education in the country who's never worked in public education, she's turned down the 5 states that have applied. So we're going to be testing this spring despite all of this consternation around the country and despite all of this dysfunction around COVID, where we should be taking a deep dive with students on critical thinking and not trying to cover so much material. This federal administration is going to have us continue to do standardized tests unless they change their mind or a different administration comes in and offers waivers. We need to assess. It's really important.
15 seconds.
It's important to know how our teachers are doing. We do not need these federally mandated tests. Cover in depth, inspire kids with learning. Don't focus on standardized tests.
Thanks, Chris. Maya?
Well, I would agree that we do need to assess our students, and it was disappointing to me that this assessment was made optional by the current superintendent. We absolutely need to figure out where our students are, and for schools and school districts that have not figured that out yet, where their students are, kids are coming from very different places. We're seeing the summer slide effect magnified right now, and we're still seeing in some school districts kids not having signed on at all, going missing effectively. So we need to figure out where students are. And I think this will help teachers in the long run. One of the hardest part about a teacher's job is teaching to every student in the classroom. They're all coming from different places. And let's be honest, kids all learn at different paces and at different paces throughout their time as students. So this is again where I think technology can play a fundamental role in helping and supporting teachers and students. To answer your question about mastery versus, well, for me, it's mastery versus seat time, curriculum versus mastery, demonstrating mastery. Curriculum is absolutely important, and it's something teachers take pride in developing. But if we can help students that want to test out of a subject to be able to get that credit so they can focus more on what they want to learn, I want to explore that possibility. If there's a way for a student to be able to demonstrate mastery, and we have abundant education technology which does this today, I think we should explore those options and explore those avenues. And again, I want to emphasize the way that we can help teachers be able to monitor student progress as we monitor kids demonstrating
15
mastery,
seconds.
and technology helps us do that. So I hope to continue that. I think mastery is important, but I think curriculum is also, of course, very, very important to teachers.
Thanks, Maya. Chris, would you like 30 seconds?
Yeah, this has been researched so much, and that's the real strength of where we come from in Washington with the philosophy I've tried to bring. Teachers, no, trust them. They are experts. Local accountability matters the most. There is no research that says high stakes testing creates a better education system. It's important to have assessment. We both agree to that. But if you look at the research, it says that a teacher observing a kid for 1,000 instructional hours a year has much higher validity in understanding what a student knows and can demonstrate. Think of a high school student, 6 periods a day, 2 semesters, 4 years. You get 48 different observations. It has significantly more validity in how they'll do in college or than any standardized test. It's about attendance. It's about trusting teachers to evaluate student knowledge, not high stakes federally mandated exams.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, our next question. As we know, many parents who did not volunteer for the job are now tasked with helping their children learn at home due to COVID-19. Here in Wahkiakum, we are really fortunate to be in school on a hybrid system where our 4th through 12th graders attend 2 days a week and are at home 3 days a week. Our K-3 students are here 4 days a week. But even with that, many parents are still struggling at home with those children. Are those parents due any financial compensation, in your opinion? Why or why not? And if yes, how would you propose that would be funded? So Maya, it's your turn to start.
Yes, well, this is absolutely something that I've advocated for since we closed schools back in, April, thereabouts, spring break time. I had advocated for and requested of the legislature a $2,500 per student stipend. This is to help parents, and it is a temporary bandage fix. I understand what you're saying about, with kids only coming to school so many days per week. Parents do need that help, and oftentimes it's childcare related. Oftentimes it's what is needed to fill in the gaps at home so that kids can continue learning 5 days a week. This is still the paramount duty of our state, and I know it's being framed by the superintendent as taking away from education funding. Somehow it's a budget cut. But I believe that the education dollars belong to the students, not to a system itself. Parents need this help now, and it's wonderful that you're in a hybrid model, but as we know, most of the districts across Washington remain closed and are required to do online learning. Of course, women are unfortunately the ones bearing this burden. Single mothers are bearing it, twice as hard. They've got to go to work and somehow make sure their kid doesn't, go AWOL from school. This has been heartbreaking to hear some of these stories. I talk to parents who've got 3 kids in school, dad's an essential worker, they've got 1 kid with special needs, and they're having to do online school exclusively. Mom's not working anymore, and it continues to be women that pay the burden for schools being closed. So I've asked for $2,500 per student. We spend anywhere from $11,000 to $16,000 per student. We can afford this $2,500. I'll find a way. It may be different from district to district, but it takes collaboration and it takes a willingness to do it.
Thanks, Maya. Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, our guidance in the spring, different than or in the fall, different than last spring when the governor shut down our facilities. And let's remember that a public health official, a school district, or a governor can shut down facilities. The school superintendent cannot. And the only people who can reopen schools is a local school board. The state superintendent cannot force schools open. Neither can the governor or anybody else except the local school board. So what we have now is guidance to districts that's very clear based on the performance of the virus in their community and how they respond, a gradual opening, and you all have done a remarkable job down there. Other districts are in much higher risk categories, so they're slowly opening, but they're careful about this. What we made clear in our guidance that was our facilities are open this fall. So even if you are in a remote model, if there's a family that cannot get connected due to the internet issues, or they've got a student with a disability who really needs an in-person service, the guidance is very clear. Our districts need to create that accommodation for them. This thing about $2,500, I just want to clarify this for folks. You're talking about a 20% across the board reduction to the teachers, the counselors, the nurses, the administrators, the folks who are currently delivering instruction right now in Wahkiakum County in the Kathlama area. You would have to cut 20% of your budget to give $2,500 vouchers to families and hope that they spend it back on you or somebody else. And what we see all over the South with voucher systems is resegregated schools and less performance. Less performance. Families get a minimal amount of money. Then when they go shop for a school option, a high tuition is put on certain communities where families are wealthy and can afford it. So they take their voucher and pay tuition, and you get elite white schools, and everyone else is in schools that are less resourced. The research is abundantly clear that vouchers are a disaster in this country for equity, and this would only compound that. The only other option is to raise $2.5 billion in taxes to pay for my opponent's idea, and nobody can afford $2.5 billion more in taxes. So you're either slashing current budgets or you're raising taxes. I say invest in school districts, keep our buildings viable and open, support individual families.
Thanks, Chris. Maya, you can have 30 seconds to respond if you'd like.
Yeah, please. So schools have been closed for a long time. We're spending less on student nutrition, spending less on transportation. I'm not talking about taking away money from salaries, but there is a way to do it. And I don't think that $2,500 is a voucher that entices a parent to go to a private school per se. They need help now. And it's funny how now it's up to local control, but when you want to force a sex ed bill through, you change the law to do it.
A law that empowered local control.
Now it's up to local control. Now districts can figure it out. But when you want something done, you find a way.
Okay, time up. All right, our next question. As school districts are unable to afford, a lot of this is about funding, as we know, as school districts are unable to afford the extra expenses that are being passed on to each of them, for the CDC COVID-19 compliance, how will OSPI and the legislature help them with the anticipated long-term financial burden of this pandemic? And that would be, it's your turn, Chris, to start.
Yeah, this is the complexity of this. Everyone has a running debate without the facts on whether this is costing us less or more. And in some places it costs us more. Let's take nutrition, for example. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has said, let's make sure we're feeding families during this crisis. So we've opened up nutritional services for all families right now. It's a smart thing to do. It stabilize families in a community. But that means the district isn't collecting revenue. So in nutrition, it's costing us more money right now. We're probably saving some money in custodial for districts that are fully remote right now because they're not there having to clean as frequently. So you can save a little bit of money in custodial. But between custodial, transportation, and other things, at best, you're saving $700 or $800 per child right now. So this whole concept of a $2,500 thing would far exceed anything that's being saved. So our goal right now is to get as quickly as we could federal stimulus dollars passed on a bipartisan basis to districts. It's about $200 million that's out there right now, but it represents only about 1.2% of entire school district budgets. So it's not this lifeline of salvation, and it's limited. It's one-time money, so you can't put it in permanent compensation. You got to be very careful on how you spend that. We've also opened up the ability for districts to get reimbursed from federal dollars where they are providing internet access for families. It's really important that we do that right now to lift up and support families in remote learning. But again, one-time money. So this question is going to come to the legislature, and they're going to be asked, what can you do to flex up money so districts can optimize what they have? How will you shore them up where things cost more? And if you're going to extract savings from districts, will it be there though when we reopen? And that's the real key for legislators. It's going to take bipartisan work to work through this.
15 seconds.
Surprisingly, if you're paying your teachers and your counselors, even in remote learning, this is not a saver on balance. It's relatively neutral, but the cost to support families is actually going up right now. This is going to be a tough one for the legislature.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Maya, the question was, how are school districts going, who are unable to afford the extra expenses for the COVID-19 compliance with CDC? How will OSPI and the legislature help them with the anticipated long-term financial burden?
I do believe that we can get bipartisan support on helping shoring up funding that is required to be able to reopen schools, such as PPE equipment and other expenses, making sure that schools are safe. We also know that there are resources available that have been donated to schools. I had heard from different ESDs, educational service districts around the state, that while one service district had a surplus of PPE equipment ready to use, other ESDs had to take out a loan to be able to purchase PPE equipment. So one of the things that obviously the superintendent's office ought to be doing is coordinating those donations to make sure that our state is well served. It's unfair that the Puget Sound continues to receive, disproportionate access while having, higher property tax values. I will touch on the fact that the McCleary decision under my opponent's administration raised the levy lid already. This was supposed to help normalize and stabilize and make more equal funding between rural communities and suburban communities or urban communities in Western Washington. But unfortunately, under his watch, we've already raised the levy lid from 150 to 250. So we're right back where we started before McCleary. Even though we've more than doubled education funding in recent years, we're now back in a position where rural school districts are unfairly disadvantaged. So that's one of the things that I would like to address with the legislature when it comes to PPE equipment and other things related to COVID. We've got to shore up districts, but let's be smart about where we already have resources available, where technology is needed, where PPE equipment is available, and let's find out how we can get more.
Okay, thanks, Maya. Chris?
Yeah, let's fact check here. Before the McCleary decision, we were about 25 to 28% dependent on local levies. The legislature has reduced our dependence on local tax levies down to about 17% on average. It was a lot of rural communities who said, hey, you cut us too far. Our voters put this in place and we want a little bit of relief back on that. And the cool part was we negotiated a bipartisan deal to give those rural communities the option if they want to come up a little bit. And we guaranteed them still the $1,500 in what we call levy equalization. The state helped subsidize rural and remote communities. Lastly, we did coordinate PPE. And the amazing thing about this system is in the early days of this, it all went to healthcare and hospital that we had in our nursing centers. And since then, we've been bulk purchasing, saving taxpayer money, and using distribution around the state.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, we have a follow-up question for each of you. Each of your questions are a little bit different this time. And it's a follow-up from the Washington State Wire debate in September that you both were a part of. So Maya, your question is first, and it says, have you been awarded your master's degree yet from Western Governors University? And tell us about your capstone project that you referenced as being timely. I think you were talking about getting it completed.
Yeah, so my paper's being graded right now, but the capstone is about computer-based instructional strategies to improve instructional delivery for teachers. So this is so timely right now amidst online learning and hybrid models like yours. I think it's very timely and appropriate that, in this Masters of Curriculum and Instruction, we're focusing on these computer-based strategies to help improve teachers' instructional delivery, not, only in a time of a pandemic, not in an online, 100% online learning environment, but how can we utilize different strategies to be able to improve instructional delivery for teachers? And this is as measured by teachers. Sorry, I can't. I'm sorry. So as measured by teachers' perceived effectiveness. So that's what my capstone project is about. I think it's very timely. Still waiting for the final word on whether or not I've passed, but I've taken every class and I'm looking forward to having that degree under my belt.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you. All right, and Chris, your question. Please tell us your top 5 contributors and why you would believe they are not contributing due to a hidden agenda or favors.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really grateful to have the endorsement of all the newspapers so far that have endorsed in this race. I've got endorsement from organized labor. I have endorsement from the environmental community. I have endorsement from the Association of Washington Businesses. So we've built a very broad coalition on this. I have multiple donors who are at the maximum level. including some individuals. So you can go to the PDC to take a look at all of our donations, write down exactly who gives to us, but also some business community folks, including Boeing, for example, aerospace manufacturer, public school employees of Washington, our classified school employees, the Washington Education Association. So the breadth of our donations are very huge, and I really encourage everyone, go look it up, go see who donates to each of us, take a deep dive into that. We are a society where you have to build coalitions, and I'm proud that we've got 700 or 800 individual donations, as well as these organizations. That's building a broad coalition. What is it they have in common? A love for public education and building communities and not privatizing a system to for-profit companies or faith-based organizations. That's what's in common here amongst all of them, and I'm really proud of our supporters.
Thank you, Chris. So we have one last question before we summarize. You'll have an opportunity to summarize your thoughts. But our last question for each of you, this one will start with you, Chris, is some districts have provided substantial training for their teachers for teaching online, while others have been able to do very little. Some districts like Wahkiakum are providing Chromebooks to all their students. Plus hotspots for families in hopes that everyone can have access to the internet. How would you propose to solve the equity discrepancy between districts across the state regarding distance learning? For example, I know several schools in Seattle had large donations of devices that families were given. How would you propose that we pay for this?
Yeah, this is that question of what becomes basic education. And it's an evolving question, right? When my parents went to school, like I said, they had an 8th grade education. That was basic ed at the time. And today you'd be absolutely lost without a high school diploma, for the most part, if you're a recent graduate. So it changes with time. And technology is something whose time has come. It has to be embedded in basic education formulas. So we are proposing that the legislature add this to basic education. This can be done again for roughly $200 to $300 more per student. This will be built up over time. We would guarantee access to these resources for any family who cannot afford connectivity, or even pay for basic plans for all families. But if you are a learner trying to be successful in education today, you might be submitting homework online, doing your high school and beyond plan digitally, meeting in remote spaces with colleagues and students, and doing research online. This has become fundamental to learning. It was an issue before COVID. It's now very visible to folks. So you pay for this by a very modest increase in investment from the state, which is the only way you can guarantee it goes to every student and isn't a function of living in a community with a software giant who can donate tens of thousands of devices. Back to this idea that we've got to protect rural communities. That's what basic education does.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So Maya, how would you propose to solve the equity discrepancy between districts across the state around distance learning?
Yeah, well, in the same way that I think we should have made sure that we were sharing PPE donations, I want to go to these same donors that are, giving laptops to the Seattle public school kids and, ask them for donations or support in being able to provide for rural districts. I mean, we know that Seattle Public Schools is 1 million students. We can do this for our kids statewide, and it doesn't need to be just donation. We certainly can support it with state funding if we're allowed to do that. If the legislature grants us the funds to do that, but we absolutely need to make sure that there is fairness happening here. I mean, I mentioned this already, but it continues to be unfair that the Puget Sound is over flooded with resources and that the rest of the state really has to come up with it on their own. So I want to be a superintendent for all students, and I have long fought for these disparities and discrepancies between the haves and have-nots in our public school system. So I don't think it's incremental anymore. I think we absolutely need to find out where things are not happening and find the solutions to be able to make them happen. As I talked about with migrant student funding, districts that are entitled to those funds and not receiving it, we need to focus in on those districts and make sure we need to do a copy paste of the models that are working and put them there so that districts have something to work with, not leave it up to local control in these circumstances. We want to empower districts and be there, boots on the ground to help them be successful. So I will personally be lobbying and negotiating to make sure that our kids receive technology support in the same way that kids in Seattle are receiving
15 seconds.
these benefits. Rural students need this technology just as bad, if not more dire, than kids in the Puget Sound. So I'll make sure to make that case.
Thanks, Maya.
Time
Chris,
is up.
would you like 30 seconds?
Yeah, just to reiterate and fact check, the Seattle School District has about 53,000 kids. So it's about 5% of our state population.
I know I misspoke when I said 1 million. I was like, wait a minute.
So the reason I bring that up is I think, even at 5% of our state's population, it's kind of doable for a company to go in there and really help them out, but that's not equity. Equity is not hoping the private sector can help you out during good times and wonder if they can when they struggle themselves. You've got to create part of basic ed. The second part of this, though, I'll reiterate, is if you're living in Bellevue or Seattle and a high rise goes up, your property values just shot up and your
Time
ability
is up.
to generate revenue
Chris
is easy.
has 50 seconds saved. Maya has 35 seconds saved.
I'll use it now. Thank you. If you're in rural Washington, though, you don't have a high-rise building with software workers. You have a Douglas fir. You've got a Western hemlock. You've got an asset that grows over a very long period of time, which is the argument I made with the legislature and built bipartisan support to say at a minimum, if you want those communities to have technology and access to enrichment activities, when their high-rise grows, which is in the form of a tree, they've got to retain those dollars when we harvest them. And that's why we made the executive decision in my office. Sometimes we have that authority to do it. We acted quickly. Then we defended it with bipartisan support with Representative Walsh, but really led by Representative Blake and Senator Tacko. Those are champions for rural Southwest Washington. We got that done, and now we're defending those dollars in rural communities. Treat them equally by letting them keep their own money.
Time is up.
All right, thank you, Chris. So our last question will give you both an opportunity to speak to any of the ideas that you feel like are left unfinished. So it's been so great to hear your ideas and to listen to the things you have to say. And what we'd like to do now is give you 2 minutes to summarize what you want our audience to know about you and your position on issues. Maya, you can go ahead and go.
Yes.
And Maya has 35 seconds.
Okay, thank you very much. So again, my name is Maya Espinoza. I'm running for this position. I don't claim to be, anything that I'm not. I, really resent, being fact checked this whole time. I don't think I've said anything dishonest. I've never tried to be dishonest. And I certainly am here to represent the values of parents, students, teachers that feel not represented, principals. I'm not a politician. I don't have written talking points. I don't have, misspoke when I said 1 million students in Seattle. I'm just a real person, and I'm running for this position because I believe firmly in the need to improve our schools and the need to deliver equitably for all of the students in Washington state. I have seen this and heard about the disparities firsthand across our state in my own community. As a student of a military family, I attended more than a dozen public schools nationwide. I never attended a single private school. My kids got to go to private school for a couple of years, and it was miraculous when they went back into public school, how far ahead they were and how far behind the public school in our neighborhood was. We have a case of a haves and have-nots, and I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it as a parent and as a teacher. We can do better. We need to do better. And right now, because of COVID, we've been granted this miraculous opportunity to do it. So I'm thankful again to be in this position, to be advocating for change, meaningful change, lasting systemic change. Incremental change is great under normal circumstances.
15 seconds.
But this is abnormal times, and it's high time we do something different. I've got kids, young kids in school. I want to see a system that is markedly different, and I think we can do it. So I thank you again for putting this on and for the opportunity to present.
Thank you, Maya. Chris, what do you want people to remember about you?
Thank you. That I'm a born and raised Washingtonian who had a lot of financial struggle, and public ed was my way out. And I think it's still the way out for families who really need it. But it has to be equitably accessed, which means fighting for communities that don't have equal resources, who don't have access to the same property wealth and the property value. Your zip code should not determine your ability to have success. But to do that, we have to be honest with ourselves. It takes bipartisan work. It takes experience in public education. It takes experience understanding higher education and what that transition looks like. It means taking on the federal government when they're mandating tests that aren't meaningful to us. It means breaking down silos and recognizing that a lot of students can build very amazing, sustainable lives through the trades, through apprenticeship programs, working in natural resources and manufacturing. So the one size fits all, everyone must go to a university, we had to take that on, and that's really hard for some people. So leadership isn't about saying all the right things. Heck, I make a lot of mistakes. I'm human. I've got 2 kids in school right now, each having a very different experience with remote learning. We're struggling along with other families in this right now, but it is a moment for us to come together, a moment to harness our leadership, to take those risks further and innovate further, but don't blow up the system. Privatizing the system with vouchers has been a disaster across the country, and rural communities get hammered the most. Because if you are a Cathlamet right now, if you are a Wahkiakum community, if you're out west of you and you lose 10 or 20 or 30% of your students or your revenue, it's not a sustainable model for anyone who's still there. So the answer isn't privatizing. We see that in Wall Street today. We're in a financial crisis in this country, but we're hitting record highs in Wall Street. That's what happens when you privatize. Wealth accumulates to the few. We need to invest in our rural communities, holistically in our rural communities, support their economies, their job creation, and their schools. That's what I'm going to keep doing. That's what it's going to take to make everyone successful in this state, and I'm committed to it. So thanks everybody for tuning in. I appreciate it very much.
Time.
Thank you, Chris. That ends our debate for tonight. I would like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. We encourage you to also view the Association of Washington Businesses virtual debate between both of these candidates, recorded online and available on their website. Thanks especially to both you, Chris and Maya, for taking the time to join us here in Wahkiakum and to participate in this Zoom webinar. We'd also like to thank the Wahkiakum County Democratic and Republican parties for hosting. Our final 2 debates in this debate cycle are tomorrow night with the District 19 legislature candidates, and then next Wednesday evening with the 4 county commissioner candidates. The YouTube recording of this debate will remain online until the election is over. See the YouTube channel at Wahkiakum R&D team, and you will be able to find this event and prior events. Mail-in ballots will be arriving soon. They're due November 3rd. Please vote and encourage everyone you know to vote. Stay safe, everyone. And again, thank you, Chris and Maya. Good luck to both of you, and have a great evening and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah,
Go
thank you. It
Mules.
was really nice to meet you both.
Nice
Thank
meeting you too. Have a good rest of your week.
You too.
Thanks.
Night.
Are you still there, Rob?
Yeah, 1 second. Let me turn off the